Hello, good morning. Today's reading is from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 28, verses 1 to 10. Paul and Luke are being taken to Rome by sea, but on the way they are shipwrecked near to an island. Everyone on board makes it safely to land. So here's the reading. Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood, and as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, the goddess Justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill effects. The people were expecting him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god. There was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home and showed us generous hospitality for 3 days. His father was ill in bed, suffering from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him and after prayer placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of those on the island who were ill came and they were cured. They honoured us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed. After 3 months, we put out to sea in a ship that had wintered in the island. And we thank God for this reading from his word. Well, except for the shipwreck and one other thing, there's nothing particularly remarkable or unusual, I suppose, about this episode as far as Bible stories go anyway. Luke tells us that once he and Paul had got over their traumatic manner of arrival, they were taken in by a man whose father was ill. Paul laid hands on him and he was healed. Then a lot of other sick people on the island came and they were healed as well. It's just one of many instances of people being healed by the apostles, instances that are recorded in the book of the Acts. But the thing that strikes me is the little incident where Paul gathers firewood to help build the bonfire that the islanders are making for the castaways. As he goes to put the wood on the fire, a viper comes out of it and fastens itself on his hand. He has to shake it off. Notice the reaction of the islanders. I can imagine them leaping back in horror. And Luke tells us they expected Paul to drop dead. They think this misfortune means that Paul must be some sort of villain, a murderer even. He's escaped from the shipwreck, but the goddess of justice has got him anyway. They don't want anything to do with him. But then what happens? Nothing. Paul doesn't drop dead. He's not even ill. The islanders quickly change their minds. Far from being a villain, Paul must be a god. So it's then that the local head honcho invites Paul and Luke to stay with him for a few days. And eventually they stay on the island for 3 months and are treated like royalty. What we see here is that different attitude we have to those who are on the margins of society and those who are favoured by good fortune. It reminds me a bit of Eric Clapton's song where he says, "Nobody knows you when you're down and out. When you get back on your feet again, everybody wants to be your long-lost friend." And Job in the Bible, of course, has a lot to say about that sort of thing in the midst of his misfortunes. "My relatives and friends have all left," he says. "House guests forget I ever existed. The servants treat me like a bum off the street. Look at me like they've never seen me before." That's not the King James Version, of course. It's the Message. What Job complains about is that instinctive reaction that we might have to misfits of any sort. But we don't live by instinct. We have a conscience. So when we come across beggars on the street, or we hear of refugees, migrants, asylum seekers, anybody who's struggling with life, as Christians we remember that Jesus is in those people, and of course Jesus is in us. So we're all one with each other. No doubt, Paul and Luke spent plenty of time on the island teaching the people about the one true God, and doing more acts of healing, and maybe helping to gather more firewood. Good works and compassion for the lost are at the heart of evangelism. A 17th century prayer of George Fox. O Lord, baptize our hearts into a sense of the conditions and needs of all people. Amen. Keep yourself and others safe. God bless you and all those you love.